President Biden is expected to hold a major phone call with allies this morning. He's returning to Washington after meeting with his national security team in Wilmington, Delaware over the weekend. And it comes after the U.S. and its allies agreed to cut most Russian banks out of SWIFT. That is an international banking messaging system. So Ed O'Keefe is in Wilmington now and joins us this morning. Ed, good morning. Thanks for joining us. So the president was busy all weekend, despite the fact that he wasn't at the White House. He was in Delaware, his home in Delaware. What happened over the weekend? What was the president doing? Did we see more sanctions? Could we see more sanctions?
Yeah, he was here for the funeral of a family friend and to see his grandchildren and whatnot. But, you know, the presidency travels with him. So he held meetings yesterday and Saturday with national security officials back in Washington, keeping abreast of the situation. And on Saturday, U.S. officials scrambled along with most European powers to, as you pointed out there, kick most Russian banks off the SWIFT banking messaging system that essentially makes it easier for international transactions to be conducted. Otherwise, you literally have to pick up the phone or send a fax, and that can obviously slow down money. The other thing that's anticipated is we'll learn more later today about plans to target Russia's central bank, which has caused the ruble to just collapse overnight in currency trading. And we're going to see an international attempt by the U.S. and European allies to go after oligarchs, or those close to the Russian president, who've tucked away hundreds of billions of dollars, it's estimated, of the Russian leader's wealth in overseas or offshore accounts, putting that money in real estate near your offices there in New York, quite frankly, down in Miami, places like Saint-Tropez, yachts that are parked at various marinas around the world, other massive estates, and in other holdings. European and American officials now saying that kind of wealth, which is tied to the Russian leader, now has to be targeted as well.
Ed, you may or may not know this, but you said most Russian banks have been sort of yanked from the SWIFT system. Why not all?
It's not entirely clear, but in essence, it's about 80% of Russia's banks. And I believe part of it is there's a concern that if you cut them all off, you may be affecting the Russian people themselves, regular everyday Russians, to a degree that's just too much so suddenly. So, you know, will it eventually happen? Potentially. And we saw Republican lawmakers, especially over the weekend, say, look, 80% is great, but Putin controls 100% of the banks, or he could put money into those 20% and still be able to operate on the global stage. So why not go after all of them? Will we get there? I mean, potentially, but I think there's an understanding that if you do too much of this too quickly, it could cause disruption that trickles across the world.
So, listen, I want to pivot. The president also has something else that he's been working on, his State of the Union address. It occurs to me that it's probably going to be a pretty challenging speech. Not only do we have what's happening in Ukraine, the possibility of a mass protest happening in Washington, D.C. with the truckers, but also I don't know, how much of his agenda he's actually managed to accomplish thus far. Do we know what he's going to focus on?
Well, it's expected that he's going to talk about the historic legislation passed in his first year regarding economic recovery from the pandemic, the infrastructure spending that is beginning to start trickling out to the states. Talk about the fact that, in many ways they have done things that restore the United States to ways that it should have been during the Trump years. But aides said over the weekend, or cautioned, that it is likely now that it's going to focus more on world affairs than maybe originally anticipated. Normally foreign policy takes but a few lines at the end of the speech once many people have drifted off to sleep and lawmakers have already stood and applauded for all sorts of other things. But in this case, given the urgency of the crisis in Ukraine, how much it's dominated America's attention in recent days, how much time the president has spent on this in recent months, it seems that he's going to take advantage of this captive audience and try to explain things a little bit in that regard. But you're right, we haven't heard anything, and we may later today, about how specifically he might try to revive his domestic agenda. Will there be some new version of Build Back Better, or do you take parts of it out, like trying to restore the child tax credit or do something regarding climate change, especially given the UN report that's out today, again warning about the perils of climate change. And we know also that on Wednesday he's headed to Wisconsin, but mostly to tout, again, that infrastructure bill. There's no sense that he's going to be talking about something new that he'll be proposing in the speech.
One potential win, I'm sure he will bring up in the State of the Union, is his Supreme Court nominee, Ketanji Brown Jackson. What's next on her schedule?
She's going to start doing the traditional meeting with senators. The only one we know of so far for certain is with the Senate Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer, Wednesday at 10 a.m. Eastern. And that should begin what could eventually be north of 90, maybe even 100 meetings with senators in the next few weeks. But Democrats are pushing towards the goal of having her confirmed by the Easter recess in mid-April. That's a pretty fast clip. But they point to the last Supreme Court confirmation of Amy Coney Barrett that was done in roughly 35 days, lightning speed by Senate and Supreme Court standards. They say if it can be done then, it can be done quickly and responsibly and hopefully in a bipartisan way this time around as well.
Yeah, you read my mind on that one. Ed, thank you very much.